welcome Bill McKibben.
Sarah, thank you enormously. I'm gonna sit down while I talk. It's 11 o'clock my time. It's very good to be out in San Diego. It always is good to be here. Every once in a while, Masada gets me to come out and help a little, and I never turn down Masada for anything because she's one of the greatest organizers in the whole world, and she's she's pretty tough also. So the last time we did this 3 or 4 years ago, it was at Jim Miller's house, I think, and which was really fun. And I seem to remember that there was a can of that IPA for which San Diego is justly famous, but we couldn't do it there anymore because there's too many of you. San Diego 350 has grown into one of the really most important nodes of this global fight. So let me just talk for a minute about where we are in that fight and how it's going. And I've actually been in a kind of reflective mood the last little while because next week I'm publishing a book that sort of marks the 30th anniversary of The End of Nature in 1989, which when I wrote it in 1989, I was a young man. I was 28, I guess, when that was published, and now I'm an older, maybe even old man. And the changes that have happened to me are the slightly bittersweet but natural ones. I don't have much hair anymore, and what there is white, and so on and so forth. Those are the things that we expect to have happen. But over the same 30 years, the planet has changed at a kind of, even more rapid rate, almost in the opposite direction. I mean, if you look at the planet from outer space now, there's most of the white up top has vanished, and replaced by blue seawater when the Arctic melted. The ocean outside, the ocean a stone's throw from here is 30% more acidic than it was then, and its coral reefs are quickly dissolving in that hot, sour ocean. We see unbelievable tragedies like the ones that California has experienced over the last 6 or 7 years. The just sheer horror of watching the fires in Redding or in Chico or in place after place. California, that's always been the place in the world where the rest of the world is kind of looked at as this sort of golden ideal of kind of ease and serenity, now begins to cast a kind of different shadow. For a lot of people now, there's 9-10 months of worry about when fire season's coming next, or how high the sea is going to rise on the glorious beaches that gave this place its meaning. And those kind of changes aren't supposed to happen over 30 years. A planet this big is stable over periods of time like that. It's been stable over all of human history, the last 10,000 years. But now it's not stable anymore. We've interrupted it in the most profound ways. And I don't mean in any way to depress y'all. It's important to be absolutely honest about where we are, because the pace and the scale of the crisis that we face dictates the pace and the scale of the answers that we require. And that's one of the things that let me tell you another story about sort of myself over that 30 years. The first 15 of it, I was pretty much an idiot, because my understanding of the problem was that we were in an argument, and hence the way you win arguments is compile. I mean, I thought it would be a good idea just to keep writing more books, and if eventually I wrote enough of them and there were enough articles in journals and enough symposiums and things, we would reach the point where our leaders would act. Jeff was right. You know, the scientific community by the mid-1990s was in absolute and robust agreement about what was going on. Books are important, and speeches are important and things, but it finally became clear to me that we were not really in an argument. We'd won the argument. We were in a fight. And the fight was not about reason and data. The fight is what fights are always about, money and power. And we were losing the fight because the richest industry in the history of the planet was using that wealth to make sure that change didn't come. The fossil fuel industry was willing, really, to break the planet in order to extend its business model a few decades into the future. Now that sounds hyperbolic, but we know now from great investigative reporting at the LA Times, from the Columbia Journalism School over the last 3 or 4 years, that these companies knew everything there was to know about climate change in the 1980s. Exxon had the best scientists in the world, and their product was carbon, so they made sure they understood it. Their scientists told their executives in the 1980s how much it was going to warm and how fast, and their executives believed them. Exxon built all its drilling rigs to compensate for the rise in sea level they knew was coming. Okay? What they didn't do was tell any of the rest of us. Instead, they spent billions of dollars building this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that kept us locked for 30 years in an utterly fake debate about whether or not climate change was real. A debate that both sides knew the answer to at the beginning, it's just that one of them was willing to lie. And it turns out to be the most consequential lie in human history because it's cost us the generation, the 30 years that we desperately needed. You can tell the success of the lie because the person currently occupying the White House labors under the belief that climate change was a hoax manufactured by the Chinese, okay? An idea, forget it, not even gonna try here. Once we started figuring out that it was a fight, things got better because we started fighting back. We started trying to organize movements big enough to perhaps be able to counterbalance the wealth of the fossil fuel industry. We haven't been at it very long, a decade at 350, but at least there is a movement in place now. You have brothers and sisters in every corner of this planet, and they do remarkable work. And a great many of them are working in places that did not cause this problem, okay? Which always serves to inspire me. If people in Bangladesh and the Congo, I mean, I think if I lived in Bangladesh and someone said, come help in this fight, I think I might just say, forget it, just go away, you've done enough, you know, leave us. That people are willing to stand up and fight arm in arm with all of us is really remarkable, and it gives me great hope. And that we can see some of the effects of that. You know, when we started this fight 7 years ago now against the Keystone Pipeline, people said this was impossible because no one had ever stood up to the oil industry and tried to block some big project. When National Journal, the kind of trade paper in DC, polled its 300 energy insiders in Washington in 2011, 93% of them said TransCanada would have its permit for that pipeline by the end of 2011. Then more people showed up to go to jail than had gone to jail about anything in this country in many years. And that was enough to get this fight going. The fight over Keystone was good. It has not won yet, but for 10 years we've kept 800,000 barrels a day of the dirtiest oil on earth underground. But what really mattered was people all over the world looked at it and saw that these guys were not invulnerable. And now, you heard about the pipeline here that got blocked. Every single pipeline, frac well, coal mine, oil port, whatever it is that gets proposed around the world gets fought and fought hard. And a lot of the time we win, and even when we don't win, we drive up the cost, we make things go slower, we delay all that we can. At the very same time, we launched this campaign around divestment from fossil fuel. When we started it, it was sort of Naomi Klein and my idea originally. We thought that the real thing would be merely that we could kind of tarnish the social license of these companies and cause them some trouble. And indeed, that has happened. There's been a lot of research to show that it's been an important part of bringing climate to the center of things. But it worked better than we thought. We're at the point now where endowments and portfolios worth $8 trillion have divested from fossil fuels, and that's beginning to really tell. There was a story in Politico last week from the big fossil fuel industry meetings in Houston where they quoted 4 or 5 of the heads of the coal industry, biggest coal companies in the world, saying, we just cannot raise capital anymore. There's too many funds that have divested from fossil fuel, and even those that haven't formally divested won't do it because they look around and see that their peers are unwilling to do this, so they're shy of doing it too. Shell Oil said last year that divestment had become a material risk to its business. That's because of you all. That's because of the work that you've done, okay? While we're doing this work, okay, at the same time, the engineers are doing their work. And the price of a solar panel has dropped 90% in the last decade. That means that we now know what we could do if we wanted to solve this problem. It is 30 years ago, we knew we had to get off coal, oil, and gas, but we didn't know what we were going to do instead. Okay? Now we do know. It's the cheapest way to generate electricity around most of the world. If we wanted to do this, we could. All right? So our job is to keep pushing hard. And we are not doing it alone, okay? There are so many people now who are coming into this movement and doing such good work, and it's all of a kind of piece. So for instance, so many of the kids who in college over the last 6 years made this fossil fuel divestment movement happen, when they graduated, they kept right on going. They're the people who formed the Sunrise Movement, okay? And the Sunrise Movement of young people is what has launched the Green New Deal, okay? Which is a brilliant piece of work because it's the first time that people have ever proposed a solution to this problem that's at the same scale as this problem, all right? That's really important. We've got to do a bunch of things. Yes, we need to put a price on carbon. Thank you so much. There's no reason not to put a price on carbon. But we're at the point where that's not enough anymore. One of the things I have to restrain myself from doing sometimes, since I wrote the first book on all of this, is, I mean, it's rude and impolite to say, oh, if only you'd listened to me then, you know? 30 years ago, a modest price on carbon would have put us in a very different trajectory than we're on now. But we didn't do it then, and so now we're at the place where we have to cut carbon emissions by enormous amounts each year, and that means doing a bunch of things. It means working hard on this keep it in the ground efforts that have been increasingly successful. It means working hard to build government support for renewable energy installation at a kind of World War II scale pace. It means doing lots of just the kind of things that are happening here. The community choice energy stuff in San Diego is a huge victory. You know, we can't get stuff done in Washington, D.C. right at the moment. We need to change that. But while we can't, we have to get stuff done where we can. And California is clearly one of the places we can. And need to go even further than California has gone so far. You know? Two thoughts in closing. One is that the best thing that's happened to this movement is the way that it has become a movement of everyone. I remember the first day that we did the first big global action at 350 in 2009, when we asked people all around the world to do something on that day and send a picture in so that everybody could see it. And it sort of by beginner's luck, since the 350 at that point consisted of me and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College, sort of by beginner's luck it worked. We had managed to sort of simultaneously have 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of political action in the planet's history. But the thing that really, as I watched those pictures come in, sometimes 20 and 30 a minute from all over the world, the thing that got me in the gut was to see who was doing this. Because I'd been told over the years that environmentalism was something that rich white people did, and if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, and on and on and on. It just turned out that that was nonsense. Almost everybody we were working with around the world was poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what almost everybody in the world is, okay? And oddly enough, they were exactly as concerned about the future as anybody else in this room or a place else. And that's who leads this movement around the world. Frontline communities. Maybe the most inspiring part of the whole business has been to watch how indigenous communities have come to the absolute forefront on this continent, but on every continent. And the reason that that's so powerful is not, there's a tactical reason. When we started exiling indigenous people off to what we thought of as vacant corners of the world, we tended to put them in places that now, are on top of big piles of carbon or astride the transport routes where you'd need to run a pipeline. So they have tremendous tact, but much more than that. The sheer fact that the oldest wisdom traditions on this planet and the newest wisdom traditions are meshing is really important. The view from the sweat lodge and the view from the satellite and the supercomputer are pretty much in line, and what they're pretty much saying is that the view of most of the rest of the world, the kind of conventional wisdom about how we're going to just keep growing forever and on, that mostly that's wrong, that we need to think more deeply, okay? So that justice part of this equation is one of the two things that really gives me hope. And the other thing is that just alluded to this before, that young people now are absolutely at the head of this fight. Now, we had a great meeting that Sarah moderated a couple hours ago with young people from around the county, and it was really fun, and just to see everybody engaged and ready to work. That's happening all over the world. In fact, the college kids that I work with now all the time, they're getting a little freaked out because they're starting to feel very old because now there's like 12-year-old leadership stepping up. There were a couple of million elementary and middle school kids who walked out of their classrooms in the middle of March, and they're going to do it again in May, and they're going to keep doing it until they get the rest of us. The message they were giving over and over was, we need adults now to back us up, okay? And that's our job. They've managed to kind of disrupt education as usual. Time for us to figure out how to do a little striking and things ourselves to disrupt business as usual, because if you stop and think about it for a minute, it is precisely business as usual that is the thing that is killing us, all right? It is the inertia that just keeps us doing the same things or moving, changing very, very slowly when physics, an implacable adversary, demands that we change very, very quickly. Do we know if we're going to win this fight? We do not know. This is not like other fights we've had where, Dr. King always said at the end of every speech, quoting from the abolitionist Theodore Parker, he'd say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This may take a while, but we're going to win. We're not in that situation. The arc of the physical universe is short and appears to bend toward heat, okay? And unless we move quickly, unless we win soon, I mean, winning slowly is a different form of losing on climate change. That's why it's so urgent. That's why it's so important that you guys are here tonight, and it's so important that you're doing what you're doing. And nobody, I'll just end by saying, nobody is doing it better than San Diego 350. I get the privilege of my life is getting to see and work with and try to support activists in every corner of the planet, you know. My carbon footprint is absurd. You know, I've been in every edge of the world, and I hope it's worth it, and I think it probably has been, but it means that I get to see how people do things. Nobody does it better than you guys are doing it. The combination of really smart focus on policy with really tough activism, with this focus now on using a lot of art and appealing to the parts of us that all these things together mean that this is the kind of model for how this work gets done. So many thanks to all of you who are doing it. And I wish I could just tell you that your job is over and you've done enough. Look, I said earlier today, the planet is a mile outside its comfort zone. So our job is to be 1.5 miles outside ours. You're doing amazing things, and we need you to do them at an even higher pitch. You don't have to do them forever. The answer to this story is going to be written in the next decade or so, okay? So what happens now is the stuff that counts. Thank you so much. Very few people really, if you think about it, get to say, I'm doing the most important thing that I could possibly be doing at this moment. Those of you who are deeply engaged in this climate fight, you get to say that, and I get to say thank you so much for doing all of that.